So this is our instructional video for the activity calculator. So we'll start with a high level of what the activity is, what its objectives are, what's supposed to happen. Then we'll walk it back and go step by step through setup, delivery, and get to the debrief as well. So in essence, what you have is a team that's going to start behind a start line. So this is the start line here, and their job is to cross the line, work their way up to the calculator kit, which is basically a set of numbers that are spread out randomly inside a rope circle, and then touch all the numbers as fast as they can, and then all get back to the start line. We've condensed and shrunk the space a little bit. The line is further back. In reality, we'll talk about that as we walk through the setup. They're making contact with the numbers as fast as they can, like a giant calculator. And as soon as they do, they come back and they get timed for the attempt. They have a series of attempts to work with, and in practice, their best one, or the one at the end, depending on the rules of the activity, is the one that counts. So it's competitive, they're racing against the clock, they're working as a team to figure out how to solve for the fastest way to do this. And of course, this version has a set of rules and requirements that make it more difficult and complicated to figure out what is the best way to solve for the problem. So that's the high level of the activity. In terms of the setup, this is all the equipment that you need for the activity and that is in a typical calculator kit. There's a start line, there's a rope circle, and then in this case there's a set of numbers 1 through 25. You spread out the circle. It doesn't have to be a perfectly round circle, but you want to maximize the space that you have, and the numbers then get spread out at random. The key is that there are at least a few numbers that are in the middle, far enough into the middle that somebody couldn't just reach in with their foot or with their hands and touch them. They're going to have to find some way to enter the circle to make contact and come back out. Generally speaking, I like to have the last number, number 25, near the front end of the circle, so that somebody can make contact, whoever that person is, and then they're closest to the start and end line to get back and go. Otherwise, the numbers can be completely spread out at random. The distance between the start line and the circle matters. The ideal setup is that the start line is far enough away that a team who's standing over here can't see 100% what's going on inside the circle. They might be able to see numbers, they might be able to count that there's a certain number there, but they won't know exactly what the system is over here unless they cross the line. You'll see that's really important for the setup of the activity. So don't assume this is the right distance. What we're looking at more likely is 15, 20 feet, etc. We want to make this accessible though, so for groups where mobility is something you want to factor in, the closer the start line, the more likely it is and easier for people to make the distance at pace with everybody else as well. So in terms of the setup, the activity starts with the group behind the start line. And it's important that when you set this up, they don't walk across your activity to the start line, they come to the start line and they all line up directly behind the start line. You'll have a copy of the instructions, and it's your job to read them through once, and that's it. You'll see you're not answering any questions, you're not clarifying too many things, you're saying exactly what's here, everybody's listening, and then the activity begins. So we'll go through the instructions and we'll talk about what the implications are as we do this as well. Group standing here, you start with the activity overview, and it says, you're standing behind the line of your next team problem-solving challenge. You'll point over here, you say that over there is the new system for service delivery. It's made up of a border which you can see, and the spots or individual steps in the service delivery process lie inside. Each of those spots represents a potential for improvement in your service delivery process. So this is, as is classic for many experiential activities, this is a slightly ambiguous, unclear set of instructions of what's going on and framing, and it's up to the group to make sense, and it gives you fuel for really good conversation later. Your task is to work as a team to create the most efficient process possible by making contact with all the spots in the system. So as a facilitator, it's your job to internalize and interpret that, and I'll explain exactly what that means as we talk about the rules of the activity. But again, in essence, they're going to cross the line, make contact with all the spots in the most efficient way possible, and then go back to the start line. There's 9 really important rules. First one, your team may ask me 3 questions if you wish at any time during the exercise. 3 questions is the maximum, and that rule starts now. So that's very important that you adhere 100% to the letter of the law of that rule, and from here on out, if anybody makes eye contact with you calls out your name and follows that with a question, it's your job to answer it and then announce that you have deducted one of the 3 questions that they have. Typically at this point, everybody gets very quiet. They want to conserve their questions. It's a resource, and the activity continues. But again, if anyone throughout any part of the exercise turns to you, makes eye contact, uses your name, asks you a question, you must answer it and deduct. After 3 questions are used up, you cannot answer any more questions. Rule number 2, you may not alter the environment of the system in any way, just manage it as effectively as you can. Now remember, we define the system as this circle with all the spots inside. The start line was defined as the start line, not part of the system. Keep that in mind, it's important for rule interpretation. Each spot must be touched in proper order and all the spots must be touched. This does not mean that each person touches every spot, but that your team gets the spots touched once. Proper order is defined as a sequence that any member of your team could repeat out loud to the facilitator at any point in time. Human touch with hand, foot, shoe, etc. is what counts as a touch. So again, let's talk through that briefly. Each spot must be touched in proper order and all spots must be touched. Proper order is defined as the sequence that any member could repeat at any point in time. And each person has to touch, everybody has to touch the spots, not everybody has to touch every single spot. So what that means is when the group gathers round, every single spot, which here is 1 through 25, all the numbers must be touched once by the team. So one person could go in and touch all 25 numbers. That would count. Each person could go in and touch 3 numbers. That would count. The key is that all the numbers get touched by the group collectively, and that whatever sequence is created, which typically is in sequence 1 through 25, that anybody could repeat it. If somebody's back here, you could say, what's the sequence? And they'll say, we're going in order, 1 to 25. They could do odds and evens, that's a sequence. They could decide that this is a row, this is a row, that's a row, and they could say, we're going by rows from left to right in the order of the numbers in the row. That also counts as a sequence. The key is that anybody could repeat it if you ask them what the sequence is. Only one person's feet can be inside the circle at any time. This is very important. So your feet are outside here, only one person's feet. So if I go in with both feet, then I'm inside the circle. Nobody else can be inside. If I put a foot in and somebody else puts a foot in, that is more than one person's feet inside the circle, that would be a violation. But there's nothing that says you couldn't put your knees here like this. My feet are outside the circle. So if I'm here and somebody else decides to put their feet in, that's only one person's feet inside the circle. I can put my hands in, and that's fine too, as long as my feet are outside. So again, the rule is only one person's feet may be inside the circle at any time. Rule number 5, there's a 5-second penalty for each rule violation. Rule violations include touching a number out of order and having more than one person's feet inside the circle at any time. So anytime those rules are violated, more than one person's feet, you're counting it. And if somebody goes 1, 2, 3, 5 and skips 4, that is also a rule violation. Rule number 6, rapid effective contact is your goal. You will have 5 attempts or 25 minutes total to perform the task. Your 25-minute clock will begin as soon as I finish reading these instructions. So keep that in mind. It's 25 minutes or 5 attempts. And when you get to the end and say good luck, you look at your watch and you say to yourself, not out loud, that's the beginning of the 25-minute running clock for the activity. If or when they use an attempt, you will also be monitoring that. If they use up all 5 of their tries, their time tries before 25 minutes is up, the activity is over. If they get to 25 minutes and have not used all their attempts, the activity is over. So at the most, once you start, it is a 25-minute activity. Rule number 7, the stopwatch for each attempt will begin whenever the first team member crosses this line, which they're standing behind, and approaches the system. So they're all behind the line. If anybody crosses the line, the clock begins for that attempt, whether they meant to or not. So if the group is standing there and somebody puts their foot across the line, then you begin your watch and the clock begins. As long as they're behind the line, that attempt can't start on the clock yet. Rule number 8, the stopwatch for that attempt will stop when the last team member returns back over the line At that time, I will also let you know what your time was for that attempt and if there were any penalties. You may not start your next official attempt until you've completed the previous attempt. So once they're over here and working, the clock ticks and ticks and ticks and ticks. As soon as the last person crosses back over that line, you stop the watch, you announce their time, you announce their penalties. They don't have to ask you for that, you must tell them. And then after that, when it's official, then whenever they want, they can start again. A team may decide to cross immediately over and go again. A team may do some planning and problem solving behind the line, but the line symbolizes the beginning and the end of every single attempt. And rule number 9, your final attempt is the only one that counts. That's either attempt number 5 or the last one you've completed when the 25-minute clock runs out. So in essence, the first 4 tries are experiments. The last one is the only one that counts. If they go through all 5, not paying attention to get to the last one, and it's not their best one, it still is the only one that you'll count. You have great discussion points to talk about whether they improved over 5 tries, but it's the last one that counts. If they get to 25 minutes and they have not completed their 5th attempt, then whatever is the last one of that 25 minutes is the one that counts. So those are the rules. Again, group behind the line, reading the instructions to the group, word for word. I've offered a lot of extra commentary of what we need to keep an eye on for the activity. None of that is what we offer in the instructions to the participants. They just get the handout verbally. As soon as you finish the instructions, you look at your watch for a personal note to know that 25 minutes has begun. Don't make a big deal out of it. It's up to them to monitor time. And then you step back with the instructions and let them begin. So this is where the activity gets very interesting, and there's lots of ways this can go. We'll talk about a handful of really important different pathways that teams go on so you know what to look for. Your job, as in most experiential activities, is to not engage with the group unless you have to. So you want to be somewhere where you can watch what's going on. You can watch the start line because you're looking to see if anybody crosses the line on purpose or accidentally. You also want to be close enough you can hear the discussion because it's very rich. So they'll most likely huddle up, and there's a good chance they'll look at each other and be completely confused. And they will say, what did you hear? What did you hear? Can we do that? I'm not sure. We have 3 questions. Should we use them? I don't know what to do. And they might spend a few minutes doing that. If they're a sharp group, somebody will be watching the clock. They'll notice that the time has begun to tick. And then they begin to try to make sense of what's going on. They may decide to plan, look over and see what's going on, and then make an official attempt. They'll do it very quickly. They'll get up here, they'll try to touch the numbers, they'll go back, and you'll announce their penalties. Many teams realize that they have 5 attempts, and the last one's the only one that counts, so the first 4 are technically experiments. They don't count. So what they'll do is they'll cross the line on purpose. They'll walk up here, and they'll do their exact planning in front of the line, as opposed to behind it. So a great innovation there. They don't let this boundary be kind of a false barrier to success, and they'll huddle up here, but don't forget, when they cross the line, you start that attempt. So it could be that they'll stand here, and they'll go in the middle, and they'll touch numbers, and they may touch other numbers. And there could be 50, 60 penalties as they're doing that because it is officially an attempt. But they shouldn't care because they know they're using the first attempt as an experiment. So when they finally come back, which might be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes later, you'll say, congratulations, your time for round 1 was 8 minutes and 37 seconds, and there were 17 penalties. And they'll say, great, we don't care, now we know what to do, and then they might replan and then make a faster attempt. They may decide to walk back out and keep talking again. As a facilitator, all you have to worry about is that when somebody crosses the line, it's an attempt, and when the last person crosses back over, the attempt is over, and in between, you're monitoring for penalties. That's it. That's all the information you provide. In between, it's up to them to experiment and figure out what to do. Now remember, one of the rules is you cannot alter the system in any way. So they cannot move this rope and make it smaller, untie it and shrink it. They cannot pick up numbers and line them up in any kind of order. Teams have tried to pick up numbers and stack them and then just touch the top one and then they're done. None of that is possible because you cannot alter the environment of the system in any way. When a team is making an attempt, it's your job to monitor very closely. So they're going to huddle up, and there's usually a couple of most common ways that they do this. The most common sequence is numerical, 1 through 25, except the numbers are not in a clean order. So usually what they'll do is they'll divide 25 into the number of people that they have. So if there is 7 people, 7 into 25 is 3 plus. So each person would be assigned about 3 numbers. So person A would be 1 through 3. Person B would be 4 through 6, etc. Person A would go in, they would run around, they would find 1, touch 1. They would then look for 2, touch 2. Look for 3, touch 3, and then get out. And as soon as they're out, the next person would go in. With the rest of the team, most likely coaching and telling them, it's over here, it's over there. That's one of the most common ways people try to solve for this. The second one is that they might nominate one person to be the runner, and that person goes in and just memorizes the sequence and touches all the numbers as fast as they can, with everybody else kind of pointing. Here's 3, here's 4, here's 5, here's 6. It's another way to do it. The most effective way, which many teams do figure out eventually, is to take the circle or the shape and divide it into sections like a piece of pie, which each person being responsible for the piece that's right in front of them. So if I was on this team, I might take this sequence of 4 numbers, 5, 20, 7, and 9, and those are my numbers. The person next to me might have 25, 23, 22, 18, and whoever is number 1, we all run up and they hit 1, and then somebody hits 2, and then somebody hits 3, and then somebody hits 4, and then I hit 5, and then 6, 7, etc. This is one of the most efficient ways to do it, because it allows the numbers to be touched in order without the drag time between people moving between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. They can actually be hit almost as fast as you can count them. And then you can imagine with some of those rule interpretations and understanding the limitations of the rules, then there's no reason that somebody couldn't bend down here and hit with their hands. It's closer. You could also potentially take a knee so that I can be here, ready, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that can happen very quickly. Now, some of the numbers in the middle are difficult to reach. So someone's going to have to go in physically to do that. If you interpret the knees rule creatively, the way we just did, then somebody potentially could, on their knees, reach in and do that. Eliminates. No need for feet in the middle. Otherwise, what happens is somebody will be assigned those numbers, and they may have to go in and get out, which means everybody else is standing out here waiting turns, which slows things down. The other option is to just place somebody right in the middle, and they have these numbers, and everybody else now cannot use their feet. So because somebody else puts a foot in to hit 18 while I'm hitting another number that's more than one person's feet in the middle, penalty. But if they use their hands, then I can be in here legally, touch my numbers, as long as no other feet cross the plane of this circle to touch inside, and that's also a legitimate way to do the activity. So those are some of the most common, but also most creative ways the activity gets solved. It's your job to hold to the letter of the law on the handout, but remember, you're not engaging in a long conversation with people. So while they're making the attempt, all you're doing is standing here watching, making sure the sequence is being followed. And as you see penalties, typically what a facilitator will do is they'll kind of with one hand, just when there's a mistake, kind of go one of these. And that way you can keep track, so when time is up, you can say, your time was 43.75 seconds and there were 4 penalties. And if you can remember what they were, that's very helpful to explain what happened. And that fuels the group's knowledge, and that is what we hope you'll be able to offer. Sometimes it's hard to remember if there's that many penalties, so you can more generally say there was more than one person's feet in the circle twice, and somebody hit 11 before they hit 10. That is also a penalty, and then people carry on, and it's your job to then track the time as well. So a couple of important layers of this that teams will test creatively that you have to be prepared for. The first is the line. So again, this is the system. That's the start line. The rule is the system cannot be altered anyway. There's nothing that says that the line can't be altered. So there are some teams that might decide that they will pick up the rope and walk it and place it right here and eliminate the entire time it takes to travel the distance between start and the system. As far as we're concerned, that is completely legal and okay to do. It's very creative, and it is legitimate with the interpretation of the rules. And so then they'll start here and just begin. There are occasions where teams will begin to get more creative, and they'll take the line, they'll bring it past the circle, and they'll put it over here, and they'll say, well, now this is behind the line, so technically we've started and finished, and the clock cannot begin, so our time is 0. We do not allow that. That is wonderfully creative, but it defeats the purpose of the problem-solving elements of the activity. When it comes to the questions are an incredible resource, and it's really important that teams have them because they add a layer to the activity. But some teams make mistakes with them, some teams get very creative with them. Again, any question that's asked, you must answer literally as it was asked with no more or less information, and then deduct. So there will be times where, in the heat of the moment, teams will do their activity, they'll run back to the beginning, you will say, congratulations, your time was 43 seconds and you had 2 penalties. And somebody will say, I'm sorry, what did you say? And you will say, congratulations, your time was 42 seconds and there were 2 penalties. You have 2 questions left. Anything they ask, you must respond to. And they are going to hopefully help each other to figure out what is a better use of those questions. In terms of what's a better use, there's a number of questions they'll ask that you want to be prepared for. One is they might say, they might ask for a specific rule clarification. Can you explain to us this rule again? What is the system? Can you explain to us whether this is legitimate or not? And you only give what they ask, and you offer the full picture of just that question. The second one is they often will ask the question of, can you read us the instructions again? There's nothing that says you can't, so you'll take the instructions and you'll stand there and you'll read the entire thing again. Don't forget, the clock is ticking. It already began at the first time you read it, so even though you're saying your 25-minute clock begins after I read these instructions, it's already begun. Some teams will ask very creatively, can you give us a copy of the instructions? The answer is yes. So you will then hand them the instructions, and they are free to use them any way you want. Some teams may ask, can you tell us the best way you've ever seen this done? Now this is one of those points where it's an incredibly creative question, and technically you should be able to answer it and tell them, yes, here's what I've seen, except that we need them in the team building layer of this activity to work as a team to do the problem solving. So the typical answer should be something along the lines of, that is an excellent question. Unfortunately, that is one of the questions I cannot answer. You will not lose a question for that. We applaud your creativity. Please continue. So anything that's about best way you've seen it done, that solves for the problem by you telling them the answer. Again, we want to acknowledge their creativity both in the moment. We don't want to punish them for a question that we can't answer. We want to be able to, in the discussion afterwards, talk about what a wonderful question that was and how useful it is to search for best practices and not reinvent the wheel. And we have to honor the essence of the activity, which is to both think creatively about questions, but really it's to work as a team for the 25 minutes or the time that they're working to solve this problem. So that's one of the only questions really that we actually don't answer. And if there's another one you're not sure of and you're concerned that it might undermine the whole activity, then you should reserve the right to say that exact same thing again, which is, that's a wonderful question, unfortunately I can't answer it, and as a result you will not be deducted for that question. So that's the activity. Again, 25 minutes or 5 attempts. When the time is up, the group will finish over here. It'll be your job to announce the last time that they've had. Typically, we encourage facilitators to track on a piece of paper their timing, even on a chart to show the progress and how they're done. And that becomes a wonderful visual to begin the conversation and discussion of, were we successful? How did we do? How did we handle our resources? Were we creative? How did we utilize our team members? How did we solve problems? And then all the wonderful layers that will come up in the conversation after that. That's our calculator activity.